This is of Steel and Straw. An average day for me will inevitably lead to the point where I ask myself, what am I doing with my life? So, like millions of other people, I find myself scouring the internet to find resources that offer meditation guidance, lectures on personality psychology, and discussions between various ideological schools to help guide my pursuit. After watching hours of YouTube videos and reading through pages of articles, I was still asking myself, what am I doing with my life? But now I could find guidance by accessing knowledge from some of the most influential thinkers, both past and present, to help answer that question. It was after accepting the fact that I held this belief in finding real personal guidance, quote unquote, from videos and articles found online, that I began to notice a feeling of dread growing in the pit of my stomach. This feeling of dread was born out of doubt. With so much information available, I began to wonder if relying on the work of others actually meant I'd done the necessary work to improve myself. This doubt hit its peak after watching a series of debates between Jordan Peterson and Samharris discussing the breakdown of our systems that help make sense of the world. In order to ameliorate this doubt and bring some kind of clarity to my life, I decided to examine these scholarly authority figures, along with a few others, to see what I actually comprehended and what work I still needed to do. With so much material to cover, I've decided to start on the topic of religion, or more specifically, claims of true superior knowledge from figures of authority based on their comprehension of the metaphysical. So to begin this politically incorrect / socially vulgar inquiry, I want to imagine an individual who legitimately works to help others navigate life by finding ways to reduce suffering via metaphysics, precluding the broad idea of depositing the suffering from one population into another so that, their suffering is maximized, but the former's is reduced. So there's no transfer of suffering from one people to another and say that that's somehow successful. I do this because I believe this gives a fair opportunity to understand this individual without locking them down as either hero or villain from the outset. So, let's imagine a competent, authentic, and humane clinical professional examining various dimensions of suffering to find ways that reduce it. To act in a manner that legitimately reduces suffering in the world would require the earnest pursuit of any line in inquiry that serves that purpose, even if the evidence doesn't conform to a culture's pre-existing determinations of what reduces suffering. So, while researching the history of how we've handled suffering in the past to better inform our present efforts, this person investigates ancient religious history, as religions have been known to dabble with the subject of suffering from time to time. After decades of research, debate, and clinical experience, they materialize a dynamic system to reduce suffering. And it was during this work that our clinical professional may have identified a pattern that unifies deep metaphorical values and empirical facts. This pattern appears to show that ancient religious narratives have values encoded in them that mirror contemporary empirical conclusions found in clinical literature. For an example, the Nehushtan, to vanquish snakes, is the first kind of exposure therapy. These values are shared across societies, from ancient Mesopotamia to Islam, by being encoded in narratives via symbols and archetypes. With that understanding, our clinical professional then experiences a revelation. All of these different religious narratives offer truth, but only one religious narrative has been able to manifest a kind of truth of truths. or maybe a king of the truths. And that one religious narrative is Christianity. Ancient Greece has the rod of Asclepius, the serpent-entwined rod wielded by the Greek god of healing. And ancient Egypt has Atonism, the religion that's centered on the god Aten as the one true God. But only the Christian narrative brings both those truths together in one supreme truth, via the Nehushtan and Yahweh in the story of Exodus. So we see religions that have elements of truth, but they don't encapsulate truth itself. With Christianity, we see all of these components of truth in other religions codified together to be a kind of supreme truth. Now, I've spent a significant amount of time thinking about how to address this because I do sincerely take it as a legitimate conclusion made by a competent and sincere person. To dismiss such a claim outright with absolutely no respect for establishing a shared meaning is a non-starter, even if you happen to disagree with them. Or they happen to say that this revelation is so impossibly weird that it must either be true or insane. And they say that on one of the most popular podcasts on the planet. Or maybe they tell 5 million people about a vision they had where God placed him in an amphitheater to battle and be victorious over Satan, only to be told by God himself that he knew this person was going to win from the start. So, it is in the spirit of respect when I say the following. When any authority figure, intellectual, spiritual, political, etc., when they sincerely describe the story of Exodus, or really any religious story / vision for that matter, to be so ultra precise that it must be taken as either true or insane, then there shouldn't be a moment's hesitation to kindly reject that claim outright. Now, the rationale for this rejection is that if we're to support any idea of an optimal method of reducing suffering or a creative and continual rendering of civilization for that matter, then it is the consequence of accumulation that we hominids have agonized over for the last 2 million years as being the source of realized truth, both metaphorical and literal, and not from any deism or theism or personality cult or dogma. This rationale does not demand that people's private religious, political, aesthetic, or philosophical beliefs be constantly policed simply because they do not conform to this proposition of how truth is generated. Private beliefs, or faith in the supernatural, are remarkable, and how we've gained access to these traits over the last 2 million years is certainly even more remarkable, which prompts, at the very least, a discussion about belief or faith not merely being some kind of bug in the system, but a critical feature for our development. However, what remains is that even though a feature may be critical, its updates can be just as critical, especially when it's been determined that a private belief is inerrant and infallible, without any need for an update and without any possibility of rejection, all of which leads to real destructive consequences for civilization. What's made this investigation even more complicated is that any proclamations of superior knowledge based on a corporate mission statement or political ideology, not just religious texts, are false to devastating proportions, prone to totalitarianism, and permit wanton abuse. Claims of superior knowledge create this chaos by expanding the divide between facts and values within societies, which leads directly towards totalitarian fundamentalism in one form or another. When there are extreme responses to pseudo-problems, Examples are like the war on Christmas, satanic cults abusing children in daycare facilities, a cartoon depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, Lysenko biology, Rasenschande, Mao's mango worship, etc., etc. Civilization is tasked with correcting these responses, but the wholesale belief in the inerrant and infallible is and has been impeding this corrective work. As one example, the ancient supernatural narratives that anchor many of the planet's contemporary religions represent the infancy of civilization, and we must see this as an immediate red flag. In this case, danger comes from the position that any destructive or violating actions are not consequences of the faith, but of the failings of the faithful to truly comprehend and live their lives according to the true faith. This is a red flag because those who wield influence can play the fundamentalist game of blurring the line between evasion and refinement. Although many would vehemently argue that an aversion to the supernatural, or religious traditions in particular, leads to a devaluation of traditional moral guidance, which in turn corrodes the very foundation of a civilization. Without this guidance, this a priori incorporeal operating system, our species would not be able to create a coherent value system to navigate existence, let alone manifest civilization. The questions we have today are, how do we manage valuable and sustaining traditions without the supernatural baggage of yesterday? And how do we manage the development of new traditions without the contemporary supernatural baggage of religion and politics and ideology and so on of today? I've attempted to describe the first thing we should do, and that's to agree that our fallible species experiences gave way for us to determine what's true. And we can agree on that without the needless destruction of other people's private beliefs. Empirical analysis sees the practical application of some method to refine the quality of evidence in order to mediate between experienced phenomena and our comprehension of that phenomena. In defining what it is to comprehend something, we have to include the abilities of differentiating evidence, making predictions based on evidence, and determining when evidence is absent. Admittedly, while we work on ways to get better at playing this game of life, this game of facts and values, it becomes noticeable that there are some who operate within various power structures that have the decks stacked in their favor. But it's the collective understanding that our invented systems are just that, invented, which inspires authentic inquiry that can fight and conquer corruption. This truly wonderful ability to improve upon even the most dogmatic conclusions is only permissible when we recognize the fallibility of the invented systems we used to generate conclusions in the first place. Our comprehension and competency when it comes to ameliorating the differences between facts and values leaves a dangerous gap that will undoubtedly be bridged by one of an infinite amount of possibilities. The process of inquiry is not really for the amassing of solutions, although that's definitely an aspect. It's really to expand the scope of our natural virtuosity in the face of increasingly more complex problems. That pain suffered on a daily basis from what it is to be alive, a longing, a gnawing hunger at the pit of your soul that drives you to ask, what is this? What am I? What happens now? This never-ending journey of experience that goes by in a flash, it doesn't make sense, but yet we endure for reasons that are divine and diabolical, and sometimes somewhere in between. Endurance is what's so baffling. It feels like a road trip where all this planning is going on, but there's no one who knows where we started from or really where we're going. So, what's the source of our drive? Maybe it's the universe itself, dealing with its own limitations and looking to broaden the horizon. Perhaps the phenomenon of life or consciousness or whatever you want to call it is a consequence of certain bounded infinities like our universe, so that it can exist beyond its own limits and create a kind of ever-expanding network. The details that comprise the nature of existence will be incredibly fantastic, but even though the supernatural constructs of our species are an undeniable detail, I have a belief that they will be seen ultimately as errant, infallible, and profound. After all is said and done, what are we doing with our lives? How do we manage doubt? Are we doing what's necessary? The best I can understand at this point is that we're all attempting to navigate a series of increasingly more complex and at times devastating problems. Finding a way to share those experiences with one another so we can learn about confronting doubt and surviving it. If we can manage to accomplish these tasks without needlessly destroying ourselves or each other, then I think it's fair to say we'll be able to do what's necessary and even find a way to exist beyond our current limitations.